He called me his rock when he was 5 and couldn't sleep unless I rubbed his back in slow circles. He clung to me like the world would disappear without my heartbeat beside him. I wiped his nose through endless winter colds, sold my wedding ring when the rent was late, and stood outside in the snow at 5A. To buy him a secondhand laptop for college, he said he'd take care of me one day, that no matter what happened, he'd always make sure I felt safe. And maybe that's why, when I started feeling those tight, breathless pains in my chest last spring, I told him first, not my doctor, not my best friend, my son, because I believed he was still that boy who once sobbed when I scraped my knee. But what I didn't know was that boy was long gone, and the man in his place was about to teach me how deeply a heart can break, even after surgery puts it back together. When you're 71 and widowed, you learn to quiet your needs. You learn to wait your turn in conversation, to step aside in crowds, to excuse your presence like a whisper in someone else's home. But when you're a mother, no amount of age, time, or silence stops you from showing up for your child. I thought my son understood that. I thought Tanner Beckett knew. Tanner wasn't a bad man. That's what I used to tell people, neighbors, my church friends, even myself. He'd never raised a hand or his voice. He didn't drink. He didn't gamble. And he always signed his name with a little smiley face, just like he did in 2nd grade. But when my health started declining, something shifted between us. He stopped asking how I was sleeping. He started talking about practical solutions to aging logistics. And when I told him the cardiologist recommended surgery, he looked at me like I just handed him an unpaid bill. "Well," he said, his fingers flicking across his phone. "That's serious. I guess we'll need to start making some arrangements." "Arrangements for what?" I asked, half laughing. "I'm having surgery. Not planning a funeral." He gave a half smile and muttered something about long-term care options. That was the first time I felt the cold slide in, the kind that doesn't come from age or weather, but from a truth you're not ready to face. I had raised this man. I had sewn his Halloween costumes with tired eyes and arthritic fingers. I had taken out a second mortgage so he could attend a liberal arts college he never finished. And now he was talking about where to put me. Still, I told myself it was stress. Maybe he was overwhelmed. After all, I was the one with a failing heart, not him. And because I trusted him more than I trusted my own gut, I let him handle everything. My surgery date, my post-op care, even the documents regarding the house. That house, the one by Lake St. Clair. I bought it with James, my husband, before cancer took him. Tanner was only 12 then. That little home saw our darkest winters and our brightest birthdays. When I downsized 10 years ago, I moved back in, not because I wanted luxury, but because I wanted peace. And Tanner had said something like, "Let's just put the house in my name, Mom, for legal stuff. You know, it'll make things easier if anything happens." I nodded, tired of paperwork and pain, and signed whatever he told me to sign, because I trusted him, because he was my son. As surgery day approached, he assured me everything would be okay. "We'll take care of you, Mom," he said. "Chloe and I are rearranging our schedule to be around." I was relieved. Chloe had always been polished. The kind of woman who set the table with cloth napkins and whispered passive-aggressive things over brunch. But I thought, maybe now, she'd show me warmth. Maybe she'd be there at the hospital. Bring soup or books, something. Instead, the morning I was wheeled into surgery, I asked the nurse, "Has my son arrived yet?" She shook her head and smiled kindly. "Maybe he'll be here when you wake up." He wasn't. When I opened my eyes post-op, the ceiling was white and blurred. My chest ached. My throat burned from the breathing tube, and my fingers searched instinctively for Tanner's hand. It wasn't there. I looked left, only machines. Looked right, only silence. I asked for him. A nurse brought me water. I asked again. She checked her clipboard. "No one signed in for you today." "Ms. Beckett," she said gently. "But I can call someone if you'd like." 3 days. That's how long I stayed in recovery. 3 days without a visit. On the 4th day, Edith came, my old nursing friend, retired like me, who lived 2 towns over. She brought flowers. She brought soup. She brought a screenshot. "Lorraine," she said, pressing her lips tight. "I didn't want to upset you, but you need to see this." It was Tanner on a gondola in Venice, holding Chloe's hand and laughing. The caption read, "When life feels heavy, float away from it." That night, I didn't sleep. Not from pain, but from the kind of silence that screams through your bones. I wasn't just recovering from heart surgery. I was recovering from the truth. My son had gone on a cruise across the world while I lay between life and death. And the worst part, I wasn't even surprised. I spent the rest of the week remembering things, small things, like the Christmas he left early because Chloe's parents were more organized. Or the time he suggested I get one of those bracelets that calls 911 in case I fall. Or the way he laughed when I called his store our investment. Maybe this wasn't a sudden betrayal. Maybe it had been happening slowly, like rust eating through metal you thought was strong. Some stories hit you in the face. Others cut you a little deeper every day until you wake up bleeding. This wasn't just a heartbreak. It was the beginning of a real revenge story. But not the kind with shouting or slamming doors. The kind where a woman learns, finally, that she doesn't need to be anyone's burden, just to be someone's mother. And in that sterile white hospital room, wrapped in stiff blankets and memories, I made a quiet vow. If I was still alive, I would start living. And not for him. Not anymore. The hospital released me on a Tuesday. I remember the sky was painfully blue, so bright it made my eyes sting. That kind of sky feels like an insult when your chest still throbs with fresh stitches and your son hasn't answered your calls in days. Edith wheeled me out in silence. She didn't ask if Tanner was meeting us. She already knew the answer. I was supposed to go home. That was the plan. Tanner had promised the guest room would be ready. "We'll fix it up for you, Mom." Soft blankets. A little lamp by the bed. "You'll recover in peace." I had pictured it while I was under anesthesia, his voice reading to me like when I was sick with the flu in '92, the scent of soup on the stove, maybe even Chloe, smiling softly from the hallway. But when the cab turned onto my old street, something looked off. The driveway was empty. The porch light was off, the windows dark. I asked Edith to wait in the car and slowly made my way up to the front door, clutching the railing. My chest still too raw for sudden movement. I reached into my purse, pulled out the spare key I'd had for over 30 years. It didn't fit. Not just a stiff lock, a replaced lock. I tried again. Nothing. Edith had gotten out of the cab by then. She called Tanner for me, her voice shaking not with age, but with restraint. "Goes straight to voicemail," she said. We stood there for a while. I leaned against the pillar on the porch that I painted with James one summer when Tanner was 7. He spilled white on his shoes that day, cried like it was the end of the world. I had to chase him around the lawn, laughing, saying, "They're just shoes. Sweetheart, just shoes." That boy was gone. And in his place was a man who changed the locks while I was in surgery. 10 minutes later, Edith's phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. "Hi, Edith. Hope you're well. We didn't expect Lorraine to be discharged so early. We've booked her a few nights at the Lakeside Assisted Living. It's quieter. And we thought it'd be better for her healing process. Please drop her off there. Thank you so much. Not hi, Mom. Not we're sorry. Not we're on our way, but drop her off like a package." I didn't cry. I didn't scream or pound the door or ask why. I just nodded. Because what else was there to say when your own son doesn't even want you on his porch? Edith reached for my arm, steadying me. "You're not going there," she said, voice like steel. "You're coming home with me." And I did. Her guest room had yellow curtains and smelled faintly of cinnamon. She poured tea, said I could stay as long as I needed. But that night, while she slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. That was when it truly hit me. He had planned this. He didn't just go on a cruise. He didn't just forget to call. He and Chloe had arranged for me to be out of the house permanently. They assumed I wouldn't recover. They were preparing for a future where I no longer existed. And that realization did something to me. It didn't ignite rage. It didn't invite revenge. It created stillness. The kind of quiet you only feel when you finally stop asking to be loved. I want to pause here, just for a second, and ask you, if you're watching this and you've ever felt like someone erased you from your own family, what did you do in that moment? Did you fight back? Or did you go silent like I did, wondering how it came to this? Because I know I'm not the only one. The next morning, I asked Edith if I could see the house paperwork again. Years ago, when I signed over temporary ownership, I made sure to keep one original folder of documents, more out of habit than foresight. It was still in my storage box, tucked behind faded birthday cards and James's military photo. Deed of ownership, title transfer documents, notarized files. And there, scribbled in pencil in the margin of one notarized sheet, was a note I'd forgotten I made, only valid with original signature copy attached. Tanner never had that copy. He only had scans. Legally, the house still belonged to me. A strange warmth crept into my hands. Not rage, not vengeance. Clarity. All the pain, the guilt, the confusion. It didn't evaporate, but it reorganized itself inside me, became something sharper, cleaner. For weeks, I had blamed myself for growing old, for getting sick, for being a burden. But what kind of mother raises a child only to be locked out like a stray animal? That night, I opened a blank notebook and wrote one sentence: I still own something, even if it's just the truth. And truth, it turns out, can open doors. I didn't know yet what I would do. I wasn't ready to make grand plans, but I knew one thing: I would never knock on that door again, because it should have been open. And if a son can't leave the door open for his own mother after heart surgery, then maybe he shouldn't be surprised when she walks through another one and never looks back. Edith was outside watering her tomatoes when I sat on the edge of her guest bed, holding my robe closed with one hand and the house deed in the other. The paper had yellowed with time. It smelled like dust and something older, like choices I didn't know I'd made. My name was right there in black ink: Lorraine Beckett, owner of 1027 Maple Bay Drive. So why did I still feel homeless? I heard the hose squeak shut and the screen door creak as Edith came inside, her soft steps padding across the old wood floors. She didn't say anything when she passed the doorway, just paused, took one long look at me, and nodded. Sometimes friendship is like that. No comforting speeches, no sugar-coated advice, just a look that says, I see what they took from you, and I know you're still standing. I stayed in Edith's guest room for 2 weeks. The yellow curtains, the pine-scented laundry, the photos of her grandchildren on the hallway wall. I tried to find comfort in those details, but comfort is a funny thing. It doesn't work when it isn't yours. Every day I expected a call, not because I thought Tanner had changed, but because a sliver of me, maybe the part that once sewed his Halloween costumes, hoped he'd feel it, that emptiness, that pause in the world where a mother used to be. But the phone stayed silent. No texts, no apologies, no "are you okay?" He didn't care where I went because, in his mind, I had already been written out. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just left behind. I had been erased. You see, there's a difference between being forgotten and being unneeded. To be forgotten is careless. To be unneeded is deliberate. And Tanner had made it clear my value had expired. He didn't even pretend to check the hospital, didn't ask Edith where I was, didn't even drop off a bag of clothes. It was like he wanted it this way, like it was easier to live his life if I quietly disappeared. One afternoon, I sat alone in Edith's kitchen, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, and I asked myself a question I'd never dared think before. Did they ever love me? Or did they just love the way I gave without asking for anything in return? It hit me like a wave. My absence was more convenient than my presence. That's what hurt the most. I thought of Chloe, always polite on the surface, but constantly rearranging things. My toothbrush, my spot at the table, my schedule for the day. Every little shift said, this isn't your space anymore. And Tanner, he just let it happen. Or worse, agreed. Suddenly, every memory felt different. I replayed conversations not as a mother, but as a woman standing outside a house she built with her bare hands. watching someone else change the locks. I remembered the time Tanner said, "Mom, it's not like you can live alone anymore." He said it with a smile. But what he meant was, you're no longer capable. You're no longer useful. And that's the quiet cruelty of aging. Not the wrinkles or the pills or the hospital beds, but the way people start looking through you like your edges have faded. I wasn't angry. I was vanished. I started folding my clothes into neat piles, even though I had nowhere to go. I kept my pills lined up in a row, wrote in my journal every night, answered Edith's kindness with a tired smile. I did all this because I didn't know who I was anymore without someone needing me. And the most painful realization of all, they didn't need me. Not as a mother, not as a woman, not as a human being with a heartbeat that nearly stopped 3 weeks ago. I was background noise, white walls, yellow curtains, blank spaces. I could have died in that hospital bed, and their lives would have gone on without a hiccup. Honeymoon pictures, brunches, maybe a tribute post with an old photo and a Bible quote about angels. But no grief, no empty chair at the table, just absence. And that's when something inside me broke. Not like glass shattering, more like thread snapping. Quiet, final, freeing. I wasn't going back. Not to that house. Not to that family dynamic where my worth was measured by how quietly I endured. I'd spent years believing motherhood was about giving until there was nothing left. But now I saw it clearly. They had taken everything and called it love. No more. One evening, I stood at the kitchen window, watching the wind stir the trees, and I whispered to no one in particular, "I'm still here." It felt strange, powerful, terrifying, because once you accept that you've been erased, the only choice you have is whether or not you redraw yourself on your own terms, with no apologies. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew this. I wouldn't disappear for their convenience. Not again. Not ever. It was around 6 in the morning when I finally stepped outside. Edith was still asleep. The sun hadn't risen all the way yet, and the street was blanketed in that quiet hush only found in small towns before the day begins. I sat on her porch swing wrapped in one of her knitted shawls, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee I didn't remember making. Something about the silence made everything feel heavier. Or maybe it was just me, realizing the weight I'd carried wasn't from surgery, but from all the things I hadn't wanted to see. That was the morning I stopped making excuses for my son. I'd done it for years. Every time he forgot my birthday but remembered Chloe's mother's. Every time he rolled his eyes when I asked for help setting up a doctor's appointment. Every time he looked at me like I was an inconvenience, not the woman who once worked double shifts just so he could have braces. I used to tell myself, he's busy, he's tired, he's under pressure, but no more. That morning, I stopped protecting the image I had of him, and I looked at the man he had become, and I saw it. He was done with me, not because I had failed him, but because I was no longer useful. He had already filed to transfer the house title while I was unconscious in the hospital. I found out 2 days earlier when Edith's cousin, who worked in the clerk's office, quietly let her know it was filed 2 days after her surgery. She'd whispered. He thought she wouldn't make it. He thought I wouldn't survive. He had made arrangements for my absence. That kind of betrayal doesn't come with yelling or slammed doors. It doesn't even come with anger. It comes with silence, a stillness so deep you forget how to breathe. I sat on that porch swing for over an hour, not crying, not talking, just being, letting it settle. My son had tried to erase me while I was still alive, and I think that's when something shifted. You know, there's this moment when grief ends and something else begins. It's not hope, not yet, but it's the tiniest flicker of no longer wanting to disappear. That morning, I didn't want to be useful. I didn't want to be welcomed. I didn't want to be forgiven. I just wanted to exist on my own terms. I walked back inside, made another pot of coffee, and found Edith at the kitchen table with her glasses on, flipping through a crossword puzzle. She didn't look up when I sat across from her. Instead, she slid an envelope toward me. "The originals," she said. "From your lockbox. Your name's still on everything." My hands trembled a little as I opened it. Property deed, bank records. The small life I had built over 70 years laid out in ink and paper. So many signatures, so many promises. I thought of Tanner, filing paperwork behind my back, planning what to do with my house, my things, my memory. And I thought, maybe it's time I make some plans too. That evening, I sat down at Edith's dining table, cleared off the pile of mail and coupons, and opened a blank notepad. On the first page, I wrote, this time, I choose what happens next. I wasn't plotting revenge. This wasn't about punishment. This was about taking back something I didn't even realize had been taken. My power. I called a lawyer the next day. A woman named Claire, sharp as a tack and kind enough not to flinch when I told her what happened. You have full legal right, she said, especially since your son used photocopies. That filing won't hold. I asked her to begin paperwork to officially revoke any temporary custodianship. I didn't want any ambiguity left behind. No gray areas for Tanner to twist. She nodded and said, of course. We'll make everything clean, precise, yours again. And just like that, I started to come back to life, not all at once. There were still nights I woke up expecting my son's voice. Days when a certain cereal box reminded me of him as a boy, feet swinging off the kitchen stool, telling me about a dream where he flew. But each time those moments came, I let them pass through me. I let them sting, and then I let them go, because he chose to walk away. He chose comfort, inheritance, the easy life, and I chose something harder, but better, myself. That's the moment. I think every woman my age fears and hopes for in equal measure. The moment you realize no one is coming to save you, and you no longer need them to. I was 71 years old. I had survived a broken heart and a failing heart. And now I was surviving the truth. My worth didn't die with his affection. It had just been buried under decades of silence. Edith sat with me that night as I stared out the window, watching the moon rise. She said, you know, I watched you give everything to that boy. From the moment he was born, you poured yourself out for him. I nodded. She leaned closer, whispered, it's okay to stop pouring now. And I did, right then. In that moment, I stopped pouring. I stopped bending. I stopped asking the world to see me through his eyes, because my eyes were wide open now. And for the first time in years, they were looking at me. Claire, my lawyer, worked faster than I expected. Maybe she saw something in my face, some kind of urgency that didn't need to be spoken out loud. Or maybe she was just used to women like me showing up after a lifetime of being taken for granted. She filed the paperwork to officially restore full ownership of the house to me. Not that it had ever truly left, but now every legal thread was cleanly cut. No loose ends, no silent traps. My name stood alone again. No co-owner. No temporary custodian. No son pretending to hold my hand while loosening my grip behind my back. When she handed me the stamped confirmation, I didn't cry. I didn't smile. Either. I just breathed, deep and long, like someone who finally made it back to the surface after nearly drowning. And that was enough. I didn't tell Tanner. I didn't tell Chloe. There was no dramatic confrontation. No emotional voicemail. No announcement that I had taken back what they tried to steal. Because this wasn't for them. This was for me. Instead, I called a real estate agent. Her name was Deidre, about my son's age, but with eyes far older. She didn't ask many questions when I told her I wanted to sell the house on Maple Bay Drive. Just looked at the photos I handed her and said, let's get you a good price. Within 2 weeks, the house was listed. Within 4, it was gone. $210,000, sold to a quiet couple from Minnesota who wanted a lakeside retirement. I told Deidre to wish them well, and she said she would. Just like that, the last physical thread between me and Tanner was severed. No key, no address, no way back. With the money from the sale, I didn't do anything wild. I didn't take a cruise to Italy or buy anything that sparkled. Instead, I bought a small, one-story house 20 minutes from Edith's. It had a little porch with cracked paint, a fireplace that needed work, and a garden that hadn't been touched in years. But it was mine. It smelled like old books and fresh potential. I moved in on a cloudy Friday with 3 boxes, a suitcase, and my breath. Edith helped me unpack, even though I didn't have much to put on the shelves. Most of my things had been left behind, but as we placed the last mug in the kitchen cabinet, she turned to me and said, "This is the first time I've seen your shoulders not hunched. I hadn't noticed." But she was right. I was standing straighter, not out of pride or defiance, but because I wasn't carrying the invisible weight of waiting anymore. Waiting for Tanner to call, waiting to be invited back, waiting to matter again. That part of my life was over. Some mornings, I walked to the local library and sat in the sunlit corner, reading quietly with the other retirees. Sometimes we exchanged recipes, sometimes we didn't talk at all. And it was enough. I baked banana bread again. I hadn't baked anything in years. But one morning, I woke up and remembered how good it smelled in the old kitchen when Tanner was still small, when he used to lick the spoon and say, "Mom, you're the best cooker in the world." Funny how that memory didn't hurt anymore. It just reminded me of how much I'd once been capable of, how much love I'd given, how much life I still had left to live, not in service to someone else, but in full color. For myself, one afternoon, while pruning the overgrown roses in the front yard, a neighbor walked by with her dog. Her name was Marie. She waved and said, "You're new here, right?" I smiled. "New to this chapter." She chuckled, then added, "Well, whatever brought you here, I hope you find what you need." I wanted to say something profound, something poetic, but all I could offer was the truth. I already have. Tanner never found out what happened. Or if he did, he never reached out. I heard from Edith, through someone at the grocery store, that he had gone back to the house weeks after it sold, probably thinking I'd still be there, maybe to reclaim it, or check on it, or just finish what he started. But by then, the couple from Minnesota had already planted new tulips, painted the mailbox, erased every trace of him. I imagined him standing on the porch, confused. I imagined Chloe checking her phone, frowning. I imagined him dialing my number and wondering why it never rang. But I didn't need to see it, because that was his moment to sit in silence, his moment to feel absence, the absence of the woman who gave him everything. And I had no interest in interrupting it. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was something better. Free, not loud, not flashy, just quietly, deeply free, free from wondering what I did wrong, free from begging for recognition, free from bending my spine and voice to fit into a house that no longer had room for me. Now, every time I turn the key to my new front door, I feel something return to me. Not youth, not time, but dignity. And sometimes, that's all a woman needs to begin again. Not revenge, not even justice, just the sacred stillness of knowing. You walked away from people who thought you couldn't. Spring came late that year. The cherry blossoms didn't open until mid-April. And when they did, it was slow, like even nature understood the value of taking your time. I stood on my new porch, coffee in hand, watching the breeze move through the pink petals. My roses had started coming in too. Not perfect yet, but growing. That was enough. I hadn't heard from Tanner in over 5 months. No calls, no letters, no Chloe reaching out with carefully worded justifications, but I did hear about him. Small things, passed along by Edith or from Marie, the neighbor who now brought me fresh eggs every Sunday. He was asking around, Marie said once, about a house that used to be his. I nodded and sipped my tea. One afternoon, a package came, no return address, no handwriting on the label, just my name, printed plainly, and the right zip code. Inside was a photo, me and Tanner, at his high school graduation. I had forgotten about that day. I wore a blue dress that didn't quite fit and clapped too loudly when his name was called. He'd hugged me so hard afterward, whispering, "I did it for you, Mom." Behind the photo was a sticky note. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to fix it." No name, no explanation. But I knew who it was from. I didn't cry, not because it didn't mean something, but because I had already grieved the version of him I loved. This wasn't closure. It wasn't redemption. It was recognition. He finally knew what he'd done. He finally understood what he lost, and I didn't need anything else. I never wrote back, not out of bitterness, but because the story had already ended, I had nothing left to explain. No loose ends to tie. Everything that mattered was already whole in me. Sometimes silence is louder than forgiveness, and sometimes dignity speaks clearest when no words are exchanged at all. In the weeks that followed, I kept moving forward. I joined a book club, taught 2 neighbor kids how to bake zucchini bread, started writing in a small leather-bound journal each morning. Nothing fancy, just gratitude, small moments, bits of light. I began living a life that no longer made space for people who didn't make space for me. And you know what surprised me most? How good it felt to no longer hope he'd change. I had spent years waiting for Tanner to become the son I raised, but he'd become someone else, and I had finally become someone who could let that go. On the first Sunday of May, I sat in the town's tiny park under the shade of an old oak tree. Edith brought lemonade and 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. We didn't talk much. Just watch the wind move through the grass and the children play in the distance. At some point, she asked, if he showed up today, here, right now, what would you say? I thought about it, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to feel how my heart reacted to the question, and it didn't skip. It didn't ache. I just smiled and said, nothing. She grinned. That's growth. I nodded. That's peace. I often wonder how many women out there are sitting alone at a kitchen table right now, asking themselves if they mattered, if all the meals they cooked, the hours they worked, the love they gave, if any of it ever left a mark. I want to tell them, it did. Even if no one ever says thank you, even if your own children forget the sound of your voice, even if the only evidence of your sacrifice lives in the shape of someone else's better life, you mattered. And you still do. Because here's what I know now. The world may not celebrate quiet women like me, the kind who don't shout, the kind who love past reason, the kind who walk away only when there's absolutely nothing left to carry. But those women, we are steel wrapped in softness. We are the ending they never saw coming. We are the ones who win without needing anyone to lose. I didn't need Tanner to fall apart. I just needed him to see it, to feel it. And now that he did, now that he knew what he traded away for comfort, for silence, for control, I could finally exhale. And to you, yes, you, listening right now, if this story touched a part of your own, if you've ever been erased by someone you gave your life to, if you've ever sat in a quiet room and wondered whether leaving would break them or simply go unnoticed, let me ask you something. Was there ever a moment when you realized you were more than what they remembered? Because sometimes the most powerful revenge story isn't about what we take back from them. It's about what we finally give back to ourselves